Okay, I will start now, and then as people join in, we can always refresh. So first, thank you for joining us. I'm Emily Landis. I'm the Coastal Wetland Strategy Lead at the Nature Conservancy. Today marks an important milestone in a years-long project to bring Global Mangrove Watch to the world as a resource to drive mangrove conservation and restoration at a scale beyond any one organization. Global Mangrove Watch provides us with the power of information, visualized. Thriving mangroves are key to the health of nature and effective climate change action. Global Mangrove Watch is an online platform that provides the remote sensing data and tools necessary for monitoring mangroves, and it gives universal access to near real-time information on where and what changes are happening around the world and highlight why they are so critical and valuable. One of the things we're most excited about is how the Global Mangrove Watch advances the shared goals of the Global Mangrove Alliance. The Global Mangrove Alliance is a collaboration of organizations working to increase mangrove coverage by 20% by 2030. We launched it in 2017 to build a global community committed to securing mangroves and protecting the important role these forests play in our world. Today, we've grown to 19 organizations around the world with more than 20,000 experts working on this shared vision. I would like to thank our panel of speakers for joining us. I also want to acknowledge the people that are on this call that have been part of this journey. This was truly a collaborative effort that spans decades. So just quickly how the agenda will flow. First, Lambert Hilarides from Wetlands International will provide the history of the Global Mangrove Watch. Anne Henshaw from Oak will give an overview of her organization and why they support this work. Peter Van Eyck from Wetlands International will provide a demonstration and the first live Global Mangrove Watch. Lillian Niaga from Wetlands International will provide context from how it will be used both at the regional, local, and country level. Peter Bunting from Aberystwyth will go through the data sets and then also the future data sets for Global Mangrove Watch. And Chris Steiner will bring it all in from the Nature Conservancy and discuss how this will be used by the Global Mangrove Alliance and also how we anticipate this being incorporated into policy decisions. So the participants on this call are the most important people. So you are the most important people to us. An important part of getting this launch is getting your feedback. Throughout the presentations, there will be polling where we want to hear what you think about the site and how you want to use the site. There will also be 30 minutes for question and answer at the end of the session. You can also post your questions throughout the session on the Q&A board that you can see on Zoom, or if you have comments and thoughts of anything we're showing that might not be a Q&A, there is the comments function, so you can provide those comments. So thank you for joining us, and I will turn it over to my colleague, Lambert.
Thank you, Emily. I can't seem to share my screen. Small hiccup. If it can be fixed. Yeah, great, thanks. Okay, first of all, thank you very much for joining this session. My name is Lambert Hilarides. I work for Wetlands International. And as Emily said, today marks an important milestone for Global Mangrove Watch and also for me personally. So let me show you the next slide to kick this off. This is a sneak peek of the platform, and it shows us the worldwide loss in mangrove extent from 1996 till 2016, where we lost more than 600,000 hectares of mangrove forest in that period. It's not really something to celebrate, but the rate at which we lose mangroves at least seems to be slowing. To get to this number, of 600,000. Many petabytes of raw satellite data were downloaded, turned into meaningful information by many of these different partners over many years of work. And now that this number is in your heads, we can consider it knowledge to be applied, hopefully to benefit conservation and restoration of mangroves. What we try to do with Global Mangrove Watch is to make this kind of information as accessible as possible, so that you no longer require GIS and remote sensing wizards to benefit from these latest technologies. So even though this is just a simple number on a website, knowing all the time and effort that has gone into being able to present this number in this way to you today, I'd like to give you a little insight into how we got here and why I feel this is so valuable. So just a bit on the history of Global Mangrove Watch. Personally, I started working on this over 6 years ago. From the moment where I met Professor Richard Lucas from Aberystwyth University at a meeting with the European Space Agency in Frascati in Italy. And he demonstrated me this image on screen now from Malaysia, near Perak, mangrove forests. And each red, green, blue color in that image represents mangrove loss in a different year. Richard explained to me how something called L-band synthetic aperture radar is really great for detecting changes in mangrove forests. And for those of you that don't know what that is, I was also quite clueless at the time. But my colleague Piet Bunting will cover that later in this session. These results came from an ongoing project at the time called Global Mangrove Watch, a research project under the Japanese Aerospace Exploration Agency's Kyoto and Carbon Initiative, a program initiated in 2001 that aims to support the international science and science community and multilateral environmental agreements with Earth observation technology. Then, as a research project, it focused on developing methodologies, testing these on pilot sites to map and monitor mangroves in different places all over the world. From that moment on, we started reaching out to more partners, and we've really been building the partnership. Until in 2016, some of us started the Mangrove Capital Africa program, sponsored by DOB Ecology, Dutch Foundation. And at the same time, another consortium, amongst others, the Nature Conservancy, IUCN, Cambridge University, and NASA, started work on a mangrove restoration potential layer. And there was an obvious synergy here. More on that later. But in short, we decided to team up. Then in 2019, a generous donation from the Oak Foundation allowed us to improve upon the prototype of the platform, include more data sets, further invest in building the partnership. And most importantly, for the long-term sustainability of the platform, we placed it under the umbrella of the Mangrove Alliance. And the portal we are launching today is one output in this phase. So what is it that really makes the Global Mangrove Watch unique in my perspective? I thought about this, and there's really 3 key things that I want to share with you today. And I'll try and explain with short anecdotes. So it's the collaborative spirit of everyone involved, the data harmonization, and the user engagement. So on the collaborative spirit, Global Mangrove Watch, it's a strange combination of universities and space agencies and companies and NGOs, but they all share the same passion for mangroves and conservation. And as mentioned earlier, when these 2 different groups of partners joined forces back in 2016, 2017, it was Mark Spalding and Tom Worthington from the Nature Conservancy in Cambridge University that contacted us when they started work on their mangrove restoration potential map. But to know where you have the best chance to restore mangroves, you need to know where they were lost. And this information was not available at the time. With the latest global data sets back then, covering a period in the early 2000s, Global Mangrove Watch, then in the context of Mangrove Capital Africa, was working on creating these time series of global mangrove extent. So we decided to team up, spending time working together, sharing data, and in the end, in producing much better products than we could have done each on our own. And the next point on data harmonization, that's really a crucial outcome of this collaborative spirit, has been that it allowed us to harmonize many different data sets. So as an example, I would like to explain you about the blue carbon layer. So it maps the blue carbon stored in mangrove ecosystems, and you will be demonstrated that later today. But this layer is actually composed from 3 different data sets. One on soil organic carbon, one on mangrove extent, and one on mangrove above ground biomass converted to carbon. And each of these data sets was produced independently and naturally, therefore, at slightly different extents. So when we started to work together, this gave us the opportunity to rerun all the models, and harmonize the extent of each of the different layers and merge them into one. And as a result of this, each layer on the portal uses the exact same mangrove extent. Then on the user engagement, if you want information from Global Mangrove Watch to be useful, then you need to make sure that it meets the needs of the users of the platform, the people who use it for conservation, for restoration. And to ensure this, at the start of the project, we did many interviews with stakeholders and sort of categorized these into 3 broader groups that we call, we had names for them, but the first one was analysts from afar. So for example, international policy users, science users, or international NGOs, mangrove sponsors, so donors, companies or government agencies that want to invest in mangroves, and mangrove guardians, so the people working on the ground to conserve and restore mangroves. And we try to meet the needs of each of these different groups on the platform in different ways. And to just briefly demonstrate engagement, at least with this last Mangrove Guardian group, I wanted to show you the next image. This is a photo of the Senegalese National Park Service and local stakeholder networks, and also our own local office in Dakar, with participants from Guinea-Bissau, from Kenya, from Tanzania also, working with the Global Mangrove Watch team using a combination of Global Mangrove Watch data and drone technology to monitor their mangrove forests. So I'll leave it with this. This was just a bit of background and history, and I hope this provides a useful context for the presentations following this. I already know that the next speakers are going to tell and show you amazing things, starting with Anne Henshaw, Program Officer at the Oak Foundation. Thank you very much, and please enjoy the rest of this session.
Thank you, Lambert. I appreciate how much effort has gone into the creation of this platform from many people, so congratulations all around. It really is an honor to be part of this panel. By way of background, I'm a program officer with the Environment Program at Oak Foundation. Oak is a family-led philanthropy that has been supporting ambitious action on both climate change and marine conservation for over 20 years. Oak's interest in mangroves stems from the interest of our trustee nearly 3 years ago. He recognized the enormous benefit mangrove restoration and conservation has in terms of protecting fisheries habitat, coastal resilience, and carbon sequestration, a bridger, if you will, to link multiple dimensions of Oak's grant-making portfolio. One of the central tenets of our strategy, both on climate change and ocean conservation, is transparency. not only as a prerequisite for informed public debates on environmental policies, but also for achieving meaningful participation in decision-making. We also understand that for big data, in particular geospatial data and platforms like Global Mangrove Watch, to have an impact on policy, it must be accessible so that citizens know the information provided to governments and others is credible. Global Mangrove Watch represents a great example of this kind of transparency we seek to advance by being open source with interoperability and able to support mangrove monitoring and enforcement globally. Oak is so excited to be part of this launch, and we expect it will serve as a valuable resource for many of the partners we support on a variety of issues, whether on climate advocacy and supporting countries to meet their nationally determined contributions as part of the Paris Climate Accord, or to more on-the-ground efforts of communities and civil society organizations trying to protect and restore mangrove forests in their regions. The scalable dimensions of this platform are well designed to meet multiple needs and really serve as an important means to engage citizenry to see and visualize the important role mangroves play on our planet. Oak is just one of a growing number of philanthropic organizations either supporting or poised to help resource the full build out of Global Mangrove Watch. I would like to acknowledge Common Foundation, Ocean Kind, the Angel Family Foundation, among others, who also see the value of such a platform. And there's room for more donors to join the effort. Anyone on this webinar is welcome to reach out to me if you have any questions or want to learn more. And with that, can I hand it back to Emily?
Yeah, thank you. And I will turn it right over to Peter Van Eyck, who leads Wetlands International's Delta and Coast program.
Thank you, Emily. Yeah, my name is Peter Van Eyck. I work for Wetlands International as the program head of the Delta and Coast program, indeed, as Emily indicated. And in that role, I've been very closely involved for several years in the development of the Global Mangrove Watch platform. And I have the honor actually to share with you what we've been developing in the last year. So I'm going to share my screen. And well, the honor is to you as participants to this session to as one of the first people see the platform live. Today is actually the first day that it is publicly available. And I think what has been clear from Lambert's presentation is that you can really make a huge difference if you can get those dozens of different scientists that work on mangrove related maps to work together and develop much better joint products. I think what Lambert also very clearly indicated is you can make a big difference in getting that information used on the ground by listening to policymakers and practitioners and better understanding what data they need so that you can tailor their needs to what the scientists provide. But in order to provide the transparency that Anne was referring to, the data that you need in order to prioritize action and to find out where mangroves are threatened in different parts of the world, maybe also to monitor what's going on with your projects, how your mangroves are recovering, for example, you need that geospatial information to be presented in an easy way. So the data, the maps, the satellite images should not be hidden somewhere far away in a scientist's desk, but you need some sort of an interface where even if you don't have a remote sensing background, you can actually very easily access that information for your conservation use. And that is actually what the platform that you can see on your screen right now is all about. It tries to, in a very simple way, disclose all these different dozens of data layers so that everyone can play with the data and take out the information they need to support their mangrove conservation work. So if you enter the Global Mangrove Watch platform, the screen that you have in view now is what you see. Essentially, you see a map of the world that contains all these dozens of data layers and that you can access. But in order to make it as easy as possible, rather than providing the viewer a very long list of data layers that they should click on and off, we use all kinds of innovative techniques that make use of artificial intelligence and cloud computing to disclose and analyze the data for you. And that is actually what you're seeing in the left side of your screen. So we created functionalities that make an analysis of the data layers that are fed in the Global Mangrove Watch system. So if you are having a global interest, you go to the global interface, and you might, for example, be interested to learn about the global cover of mangroves in the world. And that's what the first widget, as we call it, does. It provides you information about the total coverage of mangroves in a given year, and you can change the year if you want to compare how mangrove cover changes over time. But there's also nice graphics integrated that show you, for example, what proportion of mangroves are covering the cost. So providing management relevant information at a rather generic high level. But maybe your interest is not just about how many mangroves there are, but you might be interested to see the trends. And then you can scroll down, move to another widget, and you can see from year to year where mangroves are being gained and where they are disappearing at the global level. And you can see the trend. So there's still substantial losses, as you can see from the tool, but they differ from year to year. And the biggest losses seem to be over. So there seems to be a somewhat positive trend going on. Maybe you have a specific interest in carbon. And again, using the automated assessment of the system, you can analyze with the Mangrove Watch tool what the total carbon content is in mangroves and how it differs in terms of how many tons of mangroves or of carbon are covered on a per hectare basis. Another functionality that might be interesting to, for example, global policymakers is to see which countries lose and which countries gain most mangroves from year to year. And again, you can play with the data to change the lists and get the information that you need from your system. Well, as you know, many data layers are of a global level, and they might be interesting for some. But if you're, for example, a government officer from the country of Tanzania, those global data might not be so interesting to you. You might be much more interested to access national data that are more relevant to your local context. So that's why we have a second level of detail at which you can use this Global Mangrove Watch platform. You can click on a given country, and then again, it will provide you with country-specific information about what is happening to your mangroves in any given country. Some of the data are based on similar data sets, for example, the data on mangrove cover in a given country. But of course, at the national level, there's often much higher detail data sets available that provide much more specific and much more relevant information for a country level. And yeah, that information pops up in your system as soon as you zoom in to a country level. So again, you can scroll through the widget, and for a given country, it automatically calculates all kinds of relevant figures, which you can download by clicking on the PDF button so that you have a country report with information on trends in cover of mangroves, but also derived information such as carbon content. But also, you can play with the data yourself. So if your specific query is not answered by the widgets on the left side of your screen, you can actually decide to switch on and off layers in your system. And for example, you can move to a specific mangrove area and watch for yourself, see for yourself where in a specific area the mangrove carbon content is high, for example, and where it is low. Then lastly, you can move to a specific site. So we have featured site in the systems. In this case, it's the Rufiji Delta, where we have even higher level detail included. And a very interesting tool there, for example, is the deforestation alerts that we included in the system. So by using real-time satellite data, looking at the dots on your map, you can see where mangroves are disappearing. And these data become available every few days. So every few days, you know where there is sudden disturbances in the mangroves, which might, for example, point to illegal activities. So playing with this map, combining the different layers, looking in the different background data that are fed into the system, you can imagine that there's many different uses for all kinds of different stakeholder groups that can truly mean a change in the effectiveness of mangrove conservation and restoration. If you're a policymaker, for example, involved in the development of climate strategies, you might be interested to, at the national level, look at the carbon content in your mangrove system, and on the basis of that information, devise strategies for enhanced mangrove conservation as part of the NDCs. But if you're a manager of, for example, the area you see now, the Rufiji Delta, if you only have a few hundred euros worth of fuel to patrol an area of 70,000 hectares, it might be actually very valuable to have these alerts popping up in your system so that you have some information about where you can best focus your patrolling activities and respond to threats as they emerge on your screen. So what we try to do is really take this global, national, and local information, feed it in the system, combine different data layers to make the life of policymakers and practitioners a lot easier. But of course, this is just a start. The platform that you're seeing now is a beta version where we included a basic number of functionalities. And in a few minutes, Chris from the Nature Conservancy will tell us a little bit more about how we want to develop this platform further, bringing in many more functionalities and enhancing the use of the tool. But of course, we would be very keen to also learn from you what kind of uses you would see for this platform. How can this platform serve your work on the ground, whether you're a policymaker or a practitioner? So Emily, I would like to ask you to pop up one of the questions that we prepared for the participants. We have prepared a poll just to understand what kind of interests the participants in this team have. So you see there is a multiple choice question provided here. The question being, what data sets are you most likely to use yourself? So maybe we can take a minute for everyone to fill out this poll question, and it should quickly populate the results of the poll so that we can get a bit of a feel of what participants to this session are actually looking for in this kind of platform. So please take a minute to answer the poll. And just checking with you, Emily, I think the question should be quickly accessible, right? So that we can see the results of the question. Okay, and while I think the poll is being analyzed by the system, maybe we can also pop up the second question we prepared for the group. And here's the poll results. So I think there is a clear interest for people to gain understanding on annual mangrove extent change. I can see 68% of the people see there is an interest, and well, I think that makes a lot of sense given that changes in mangrove cover are of course an important basis for any mangrove conservation work, whether it's about work on the ground or policy work that you're engaged in. But it's really nice to see there is also a broader interest in all kinds of derived data, including blue carbon storage and the real-time information on deforestation. I would like to invite people, if they have specific recommendations or suggestions of what the platform should be about and what kind of additional data we need to include, I would like to invite you to type your wider suggestions also in the chat box. And for sure, we will take that on board in further fine-tuning the platform. So in light of time, let's go on to the second poll question. If we can populate that one, then we can run through that also. So what scale of information is most useful for you? Are you someone who has an interest in assessing global trends and values and threats? Or would you rather be interested for this tool to be of a national level or more provide more site-specific information? So kindly submit your answer. And of course, you might also have a combined interest. So while we are waiting for the results of this poll, I'd like to already introduce to you the next speaker, Lilian Nyaga from the Wetlands International East Africa office, working on the ground on policy and practice work. Yeah, she will provide us some perspectives from the region, from a local level, how this tool can be of use and of value. Before giving her the word, I see the results of the second poll question come up. It shows there is a very strong interest in site-specific information provided by Global Mangrove Watch. At least 47% of the people indicates that there is this interest. This reflects very much also what we've heard earlier, that people do have an interest in global data, but for data to be really useful, they have to have a certain level of detail so that you can apply it locally. And this is therefore also a question I have to you as participants. What we would be very keen to do is to make sure that in the further development of the Global Mangrove Watch platform, we integrate localized data sets. And yeah, if you have knowledge of such data, get in touch with us. And yeah, we would be very keen to see how we can integrate that kind of local information to make the tool as useful as possible. With this, yeah, the floor is yours, Lilian. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter. Greetings, everyone. My name is Lilian Nyaega. I work with Wetlands International in the Eastern Africa Sub-Regional Office. Following the categorization that Lamat mentioned earlier of the data users during the trial period, I guess I'd fall under the Mangrove Garden, and today I am honored to present our practical experience from its use already and plans for continued use. And of course, the results from the poll, the last poll that shows interest in site-specific information actually points to this, and that's exactly what I'm going to present. So Wetlands International has, for the past 3 years, been working in the Rufiji Delta in Tanzania. This delta represents one of the largest coastal mangrove systems of the Western Indian Ocean in terms of surface area and biodiversity. It spans over 53,000 hectares and sustains livelihoods of about 50,000 people living both in and around the delta. However, despite this extensive distribution and the importance, local and external pressures are a threat to the conservation status and the adaptive and productive capacity of these mangroves. And some of the pressures which are mostly common in most of the forested areas, not just in Rufiji, include illegal logging and conversion of mangroves for other uses, such as paddy rice farming and cattle grazing. As you can see in the middle picture, that's a drone of an extensively farmed mangrove area that has been converted for paddy rice farming. And from our studies, we have found that about 7,004 hectares of mangroves have been lost directly as a result of rice farming between 1991 and 2015. So this translates to a loss of about 292 hectares every year. And this is not to mention the increased erosion from agriculture and grazing results in high sediment and nutrient loads to mangrove habitats that reduce their productivity and their quality. And also on the last picture, you can see the invasive species. Some studies that you've done in the Delta have found that the shift in water flows from upstream disturbances have brought down the invasive climber species, what we call Nyangajira as it locally, which has a negative impact on mangroves as it climbs and covers and suffocates the mangrove trees, killing them. So what are we doing to address this and the many other cocktail of threats that I have not mentioned? as part of the continent-wide Mangrove Capital Africa program, which is supported by DOB Ecology. We are contributing efforts to address these challenges by implementing what we call the community-based ecological mangrove restoration approach in the Rufiji Delta. So this approach is holistic. It was developed by the Mangrove Action Project, and it includes stakeholders and takes into account the ecological and social issues within the landscape, starting with a detailed investigation of this proposed site, so where we are going to restore, understanding the reasons for mangrove loss and why mangroves are, for example, not naturally regenerating as they actually should. So from experience, the comprehensive information on extent of mangroves and trends of deforestation is largely lacking because sometimes determining the precise area of mangroves is not always easy. And for this, we have been using the Global Mangrove Watch to inform not just the focus, but also progress of our work in the Delta. And here's how the Global Mangrove Watch is informing policy and practice in Rufiji Delta. So in the first instance, working in an area as expansive and diverse as the Rufiji Delta, it is important to identify, first of all, where is the potential for restoration. And using Global Mangrove Watch has helped us to prioritize conservation action by selecting those sites that really require action and putting resources, both human and financial resources, where they are needed the most. So this slide, Peter has already briefly introduced it. It's a screenshot of the mangrove net change. So it shows us where there is mangrove gain, this greenish color. I hope it presents like that on your screens, and where there is loss. And as such, it follows our focus for restoration has been in an area where there is mangrove loss. So we obviously follow to restore where there has been quite some bit of loss, depending on the type and level of contribution that is possible for us. And once again, one of the underlying causes to the threats that I mentioned earlier is the inadequate monitoring and enforcement capacity of these agencies. And Peter had already given a sneak preview in terms of, say, if we do not have sufficient fuel to go to the field to monitor a certain threat. So then this is where Mangrove Watch comes in for us to increase the chances for successful restoration. Long-term monitoring and management of the sites have been incorporated into our monitoring protocol. And this platform provides us with information, not just on the spatial distribution, but also on the temporal changes of mangrove forests, including near real-time alerts on threats. So this makes targeted mangrove patrolling over the large area quite possible in a very fast. And I think the launch of this platform is timely because as our immediate plans are to work with the Tanzania Forest Service, the agency mandated to monitor forests in Tanzania, and the local level structures with the mandate for natural resource management monitoring, such as the beach management units and the village natural resource committees, by first of all strengthening the enforcement capacity to be able to act on alerts in a timely manner. And this slide actually gives a good picture of the alerts. For example, we have had 110 mangrove disturbance alerts between April 2020 and May 2020. So it just very quickly shows us where these threats are. And you can be able to act on it given the resources that are available. And I think not just that, but mangrove restoration also faces a diverse socioeconomic issues that compromise the long-term sustainability and challenge the implementation at a landscape scale. So with this data over time, when you look down, you're able to download this data. I think it gives us the capacity to analyze when and where are the disturbances happening and at what frequency. And from this, we are able to, in a participatory manner, develop lasting and acceptable solutions to address these threats. So we have also used mangrove extent and change maps and other data such as that on biomass to inform the development of refugee mangrove management plan and also the harvesting guidelines. So we are facilitating this review, which is coordinated by the national entity, Tanzania Forest Service Agency, and the plan is actually near completion. In addition to this, referring to international agreements, and I had this mentioned last Friday during the launch of the Western Indian Ocean Mangrove Ecosystem Restoration Guidelines, is the need to, the gap that is there on nationally determined contributions in terms of accessing recent quantitative data and information, including that on total mangrove carbon storage. And this is also a challenge in Tanzania, and it has been mentioned already. Through one of our initiatives, the Save Our Mangroves Now, which brings together the German Ministry of Economic Development, IUCN, and WWF. We're in discussions on how this climate data can be mined from the platform and of course complemented by other sources, and how we can then translate this information to address these policy gaps. Lastly, this platform provides stakeholders, some of whom are present today in this webinar, with an opportunity to build and strengthen these partnerships around what works and what doesn't. And from these lessons, I believe that we can jointly develop workable strategies starting from the local level towards conservation of mangrove ecosystems. And I'm also happy that the platform is dynamic. Our field staff have been trained in gathering data using different methods, including drones. And from this, we are able to feed information from the ground that helps to improve this platform. And then I think results into even more accurate data. And as Lamat mentioned, this information should be as accessible as possible. And therefore, for this tool to be useful to us, the science for it and behind it really has to be the best in class. And I think so far it has been useful to us, and I think it continues to improve from where we are right now. And now I'm pleased to turn over the discussion to Pete Bunting, who will talk about the science powering Global Mangrove Watch. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. So I'm Peter Bunting. I work at Aberystwyth University in the UK, and with colleagues, particularly Richard Lucas and Orke Rosenquist, we've been working over a number of years around this concept of global mangrove mapping, and then through work particularly with Lamat at Wetlands International, but also more recently at the, with people like Emily at the TNC, we've actually really been seeing this kind of vision coming to life. And I also want to credit Nathan Thomas, who did his PhD here in Aberystwyth, and he'll be talking in the second session, who has also put a lot of work into the background behind this work. So I'll be just quickly talking through the background of how we create the baseline maps, which have gone into this product, and then from there, how we then look at change. The products which you've already been shown on above and below below ground biomass, and then finally the deforestation alerts. So as Lamat said in the beginning, we had a large amount of collaboration with JAXA, the Japanese Space Agency, as part of their Kyoto and Carbon Initiative. And that has guided a lot of the data sets that have been used in the products to this point. So in terms of the change maps that we'll come on to, those years are defined by the data that was available from JAXA. For the baseline mapping, we chose the year 2010. And this is because that was the year where we had most coverage of this L-band radar data. However, what we found is that as we kind of worked with the L-band radar, our ability to be able to discriminate mangroves from other forested vegetation types was sometimes limited just using the L-band radar data on its own. So therefore we created a Landsat, which is optical data. So seeing in the wavelengths of the visible to the shortwave infrared parts of the electromagnetic spectrum. So we made composites of that imagery over all the mangrove regions to help us discriminate between mangroves and other vegetation types. So that produced a global baseline map for 2010, which is if you go to the 2010 layer within the portal, that's the layer that you're seeing. The accuracy assessment that we've done from that would say that the accuracy is around 94%. That was statistically derived by looking at 20 different sites. Obviously, if you zoom in to different sites, accuracy will vary, but this is the global accuracy of those products. And just to illustrate why we need to use the radar data alongside the optical data, the top images here illustrating what a lot of the optical data looks like over the tropics, where we have large areas of cloud. The green area is the Global Mangrove Watch baseline. As you can see in the top layer, you can't see many mangroves with all those clouds, and the radar data allows us to see through that cloud. However, as you can see in the lower image for the same area, this kind of more, I guess, reddy orangey color, where my cursor's over, this is an area of mangroves. And as you can see in the optical data, when we can get it through the cloud, it gives us, in most areas, good discrimination between mangroves and many of our other vegetation types. And it's this fusion of the L-band radar data and this optical data that allow us to undertake the mapping. So as you've already been shown, this is then what that baseline looks like within the portal. So looking at the change, being able to, at the time we're doing these change maps, looking at creating optical composites or optical products across all the different timelines that we wanted to be able to map, we felt was probably unrealistic given the compute capacity we had at the time. So we really focused on these JAXA L-band synthetic aperture radar products, mainly because they give this cloud-free coverage, and JAXA were providing data which was already mosaicked on a 1x1 degree tile basis. So if you haven't worked or seen radar data before, it's quite different to the optical data. The optical data is allowing us to see similar structures and similar way in which we would be looking at with our eyes, just extending into the near infrared and the short-wave infrared part of the electromagnetic spectrum. While the radar, or synthetic aperture radar, which we tend to use the acronym SAR, so what the SAR data is sensitive is to essentially the vertical structure. So if we think about mangroves, where we've got our mangrove trees, that's giving us a high vertical structure, and the radar signature scatters within that vertical structure, and we get a high signal coming back. Where we have areas which have got no vertical structure, so smooth areas like water bodies and mudflats, these are kind of have a very low radar backscatter, and therefore we can differentiate by knowing the context whether we're looking at mangroves or these kind of water bodies or mudflats. And in this video here, let me just, I'll just go back a step. What you can see here is on the left-hand side, you're seeing the JRS-1, the Japanese Earth Resources satellite from 1996. The ALOS Pulsar data in the middle from 2010, and then 2016, you're seeing the ALOS Pulsar 2 instrument. In 1996, this is Kalimantan in East Kalimantan in Indonesia. You can see that the majority of the mangrove areas are white in this image, so they've got high backscatter. So there are mangrove trees. As you can see in 2010 and then 2016, what you can see is a lot of low backscatter areas, so these dark areas. And this is where the forest has been cut down. So now you're looking at shrimp ponds, and you're looking at those having a low backscatter. So if we can combine that into a color composite, what you'll see is that the red areas, these are areas which had a high backscatter in 1996, and then low backscatter in 2010 and 2016. And essentially what you're looking at there is these are the areas of mangroves that have been cut within this area. And we have a change detection process that uses that 2010 baseline and then looks to map these areas of high change, both going back to 1996, but also going forward to 2016. And this is an example of one of the maps in the same color scheme, just so you can see the areas that were being mapped. So it's these smooth water bodies and mudflats giving us low backscatter, and then our mangrove trees giving us this large vertical structure that allows us to differentiate and find these change areas. So the maps that have been produced to date are 1996 from the JRS-1, the Japanese Earth Resource Satellite. We then have quite a gap up till 2007, which is why in some, if you just look at the statistics on a linear scale, you'll see that there's quite a lot of the change looks like it's between 1996 and 2007. It's this fact that we don't have the any kind of dates in between that at the moment. Then we've got 2007, 2008, 2009, and then 2010, which is also our baseline year from ALOS Pulsar. And then we've got ALOS Pulsar 2, which is 2015 and 16, and we're currently in the process of processing 2017 and 18, so they will be available shortly. In terms of the accuracy assessment we've done so far from that change would indicate that our change is around 75% accurate across at a global scale. Obviously, if you do zoom in and look in very local sites, you might find that in some areas it's the accuracy is much higher, and in other areas the accuracy is lower. And where you are finding areas where the accuracy is maybe lower than we would hope, then please feed that back, because that really helps us to improve these products going forward. These statistics you can download from the portal. So this is just the global area from all the years we have processed, alongside the percentage of the kind of net change. So you can see that between we're mapping a net loss of just over 4% over the areas, but obviously kind of there's the loss is much higher because it's being offset by some of the gain. But as you use the portal, you can download these statistics globally, or you can do them nationally, or you can look in some of the protected regions as you've already been shown. Through the portal, you can also get these visualizations. So this is that same area that we looked at in the video, where you can actually see this change visualized, and you can choose which years you want to be visualized for you, which is a really nice tool. You're also shown in the portal, we've got layers in there, which for blue carbon. The above ground carbon kind of is from a study from Shimada et al. 2019. The reference is at the bottom in Nature Geoscience. And this study looked at doing a global map of above ground biomass and mangrove height. So what you're looking at there is they used a global digital elevation model. So that's giving the height above the ground. And this is the shuttle radar topography mission from the year 2000. It's an elevation model that was acquired from the space shuttle. And there was because mangroves are in a low elevation, there was a key assumption here that those elevations, because the instruments was basically sensing near the top of the canopy, that those elevations are highly correlated to the height of the mangroves. So therefore, a relationship was created between these elevations from the SRTM to mangrove height. And this has resulted in the mangrove height layer that you'll see within the portal. Another key assumption is then that mangrove height is then it's got a strong relationship to the total above ground biomass of the mangrove trees. And then a relationship again was developed using field data to get at that variable of above ground biomass. So at present, this is the best publicly available or widely available mangrove biomass product, above ground biomass product. And we've using this analysis, using the method outlined here within the paper, we've then cut that to the GMW extent. So it's at the same extent as the layers that we've just presented. The below ground carbon is from the study of Sanderman, 2018. This process is looking at below ground carbon, and it develops a machine learning model using the random forest algorithm to a number of environmental variables which are available, such as the tree cover, SRTM again, sea surface temperature, the tidal elevation, suspended soil matter, mangrove typology. And this study was published before the Global Mangrove Watch data layers were available, and through the Nature Conservancy and organised by Tom Worthington at the University of Cambridge. This analysis was redone and cut to the Global Mangrove Watch extent layers. So the combination of those two layers is what gives this blue carbon layer, which you can interact with in the portal. And then, as you were shown, if you go into a kind of a closer zoom level, you can then see the mangrove height and above ground biomass layers individually as well. So the other layer that we have is these deforestation alerts. So the annual maps that we've been producing that are on the site, you can think of those as looking at the historical context, and they're always going to be produced almost like a year behind when any change occurred, because we're going to have to wait until the end of 2020, so we're going to be into 2021 before we start looking at producing a 2020 map. So you're always looking at this historical context. So it's telling you what has changed rather than allowing you to be interactive and kind of responsive to any change. And the idea behind these alerts is that we're trying to look for things as soon as we can to be able to provide these alerts of change. And these videos are showing you some areas of mangroves using the European Space Agency Sentinel-1 C-band radar data. And what you're looking there is a video on loop where you're seeing some changes occurring within the mangrove areas. So the data sets that are going into these alerts are the Sentinel-1 from the European Space Agency. So this is radar data again, but it's what we call a C-band radar. So it has a smaller wavelength, which isn't as good for mangroves as the L-bands from the Japanese Space Agency, but it does have this regular coverage. So globally, every 2 weeks, we get a complete coverage, and it's cloud-free, which in these tropical regions, as we've already said, is really important. We're also using the Sentinel-2 instrument, which is an optical instrument, which does suffer from cloud cover, but again, also provides coverages every 2 weeks. And then with Landsat 8, here we're getting a slightly lower spatial resolution, but we're getting every 16 days. So we use all three of these sensors to produce these alerts. So within the data sets, what we're looking at is we're saying that we've actually got using the most recent annual GMW mask, we're actually just looking within that context. So we've really kind of narrowed down the area that we're looking at, which has meant that the kind of remote sensing analysis that we perform can be actually relatively simple. So we just have some basic thresholds that we apply basically to say, is this pixel vegetation or not vegetation? If it was in our, in this context, 2016 annual mask of mangroves that you can look at on the portal, and our satellite imagery is telling us that it's not vegetation. So we use this index called the normalized vegetation index from the optical data from Sentinel-2 and Landsat, and then we have some backscatter thresholds for the Sentinel-1. If we're saying it's not vegetation, then this is a potential change alert. Those change alerts are then summarized onto a 60-meter grid for presentation onto the portal. To try to, obviously particularly with the optical data, you do tend to get occasional false positives due to cloud cover, which has not been fully masked and things like that. So we want to be sure that we're trying to show you deforestation alerts which are reliable. So we want to have a number of satellite observations of a potential change alert for a pixel that's potentially changed before we upload it to the portal and say, here's a change. So we have a process where we score pixels. So each time a Sentinel-1 observation detects a change, we add a score of 1 for a pixel. For the optical data, because they're with cloud cover much more infrequent observations, we add a score of 2. If we have an observation for the same area and a pixel which has previously been identified as a potential change is not identified as a change, then we remove 1 from that score. So this score can go up and down. Once that score gets to a score of 5, then we deem that there's been several observations, at least a minimum of 3. It could be quite a few more. Observations have seen that this pixel is a change. It then gets defined as a permanent change or a reliable change, and therefore it then gets amalgamated and put into the portal. So we have this relatively simple rules within our Global Mangrove Watch mask, and then we have this scoring process that gives us some more idea that these change alerts are reliable. So in terms of the processing for these alerts, we're currently doing the processing across the whole of Africa. Although in the portal at the moment, we are missing some countries because we're still doing further QA tests on those deforestation alerts to ensure that we're giving you accurate data. So these countries here, Senegal, Gambia, Guinea-Bissau, Ghana, Ivory Coast, Nigeria, Mozambique, Kenya are currently omitted from the portal as it stands, but they will be going up in due course, and the data that sits behind them has already been processed. As you've already been shown, this is what those deforestation alerts look like within the GMW portal. So in terms of the data sets, the Global Mangrove Watch extent and change and alerts are going to be provided within a Creative Commons license. And so those data layers can be downloaded. The GMW Mangrove extent and change are already available for download as GIS layers. We're currently undertaking some work. We've been identified some areas, particularly in the kind of small island nations, particularly in the Pacific, where there are areas that have been missed out of the mangrove baseline mapping. So we are currently also doing a piece of work just to fill in some of those gaps. So you will see an update to those over the coming months. And if there are any areas that you find that you think have been missed that should have been included in that, please again, feed that back to us, because we want to get these data layers improved. And then for me personally, looking forward, depending on kind of time and kind of financial resource to be able to put into these, I think we'd really like to see the kind of coverage of the deforestation alerts expanded. We'd like to see the annual maps be going to Sentinel-2 to give us that higher spatial resolution, which I think certainly when people want to look more of a site level could be really helpful. And also the Landsat archive being available, we could go back further in time with a higher temporal resolution. These are all some quite large data processing tasks. More immediate layers that I think will be going into the portal in the not too distant future, things like the mangrove, whether mangroves have been degraded, so degraded index, ecosystem services, biodiversity hotspots, restoration potential, and then drivers of change. And these are layers that within the kind of wider Global Mangrove Watch collaborations people have been working on and producing these layers. And I think we have a poll for you guys to take again. So maybe if we can get the poll up, which will be asking you about kind of which of these layers you think is kind of would be priorities going forward. So I guess we're just waiting on the results of those. And once I'll be handing over to Chris. Who's from the Nature Conservancy, who's going to talk a little bit more about what we're already working on. But I guess we'll just wait for the poll results to come back before Chris takes over.
Yep, we still have a lot of responses coming in, so I'm going to give it another maybe 5 seconds.
Oh, yeah, sounds good. Okay, so I guess we've got people are interested in pretty much all of the different options. Restoration potential probably comes out just winning there. And that's something that Tom Worthington and the guys at the Nature Conservancy have done a lot of work in with others. So that's a layer that I'm sure will be going in there. Okay, so Chris, over to you.
Thank you, everybody. Can you see my screen? Yes. I'll take that head nod as a yes. So yeah, as Pete said, thank you, Pete. That was a great presentation. I think the real value of Pete's presentation is just to show you all the great science and the time and the level of detail and effort that's been put in to the science behind this platform. It's really, you know, there's nothing else like it out there yet. And as he said, in a couple of those data sets, they are probably some of the best data sets that exist concerning mangroves globally. So it's great that they're part of the platform. Yeah, as Pete said, I'm Chris Schreiner with the Nature Conservancy. I work with Emily and work with helping coordinate some of the science activities and science work of the Global Mangrove Alliance members. So I generally don't like to start out with a sports analogy, but I think I have to. You know, you can always tell how a season is going to go for a team by their first game. And if Peter's live presentation of the app was anything, it was extraordinary. Many times live presentations of an app don't work for some reason, but I think this was a great example of the functionality of the app and the great visualization and data resources that exist. So a lot of good applause, hats off to Peter and the team that helped develop the app at Wetlands International. So yeah, I want to get into a little bit, you know, just a broad overview of the tool, sort of try to wrap things up what some of the different presenters have talked about. I did see some questions coming in about, I want to address right away some questions coming in about users being able to provide or input data into the platform, and that is definitely something we are looking for in the future. I think, as Michael Crispino from WWF said, you know, this tool is nothing without its users. And we're going to eventually create a mechanism that people in the field, other scientists are able to upload and ingest their site-specific, their site-relevant information into the platform as a means to demonstrate their work, to show their work to the broader community, but also to help them visualize and understand the changes that are going on. I think Lillian made a great example, and Peter made a great example of using the application to reduce fuel costs for mangrove patrols and monitoring. I think this is a great example of how science meets the practitioner for providing valuable resources and insight to help them do their jobs better. Yeah, we're also going to look at integrating just some drone imagery. Just to add to what Peter said, we want to bring in socioeconomic data because we understand that, you know, millions of people live in or adjacent to mangrove habitats. Many of them depend on these mangrove habitats both for resources and protection and resilience to climate change. So understanding how people and communities live, coexist with mangrove habitats and help that situation improve and benefit from successes where that situation flourishes and both the communities and the mangroves flourish. We want to begin to put some of that data and information into the app as well. So going forward, as you've seen from the presentations, there's a lot of science in this application. It's been developed for over years from people with universities, NGOs, our colleagues at the IUCN Mangrove Specialist Group, and local researchers and practitioners like many of our intended users and audiences. We want to share the information so that we can understand the value and the mechanisms to protect and restore mangroves. Because like I said before, you know, these benefit people, they help mitigate climate change, they build resilience against the effects of climate change going forward. So we need to understand the value that these ecosystems provide and the services that they provide. We want to take advantage of policy and funding mechanisms so that we can help elevate the role and the profile of mangroves into policy discussions. We want to bring in financial incentives and opportunities to help restore and protect mangroves. This is key. And also, you know, working with the Global Mangrove Alliance, 20,000 plus scientists, as Emily said in the beginning. You can't find a bigger network anywhere. And to bring this data available to our huge network of mangrove scientists and practitioners, I think is key and something that the Global Mangrove Alliance will be focusing on heavily in the future. So why is this important? Well, we all know the reason to that, but the United Nations has called this next 10 years the decade of restoration. And this is in order to provide food security and mitigate changes to mitigate climate change and its impacts, as said before. But you know, we also want to improve community well-being and livelihoods through economics and job creation. To focus on those activities that benefit both the communities and mangrove habitats. 50% of the mangroves globally have been lost in the past 50 years. This rate is continuing to increase anywhere from 1% to 2% annually. We're losing mangroves. So this has to stop. Protection is key. We do understand that. We have to prevent the conversion of mangroves. But we also need to restore the mangroves that have been lost. This is going to be key too. And one of the key elements in the future of the tool will be what we're calling the Mangrove Restoration Framework and Tracking Tool. This is being developed by our colleagues at Cambridge University, Tom Worthington and Yasmin Gatt, along with our colleagues, our GMA colleagues at the World Wildlife Fund, Dominique Adrani Brown and Gabby Amadea. They're working to develop an inventory of mangrove restoration projects worldwide, develop a standard reporting framework, and all of this will be ingested into the Global Watch Mangrove platform. So here you have now in one location, one place, a accounting of mangrove restoration projects around the world, all using common or standard reporting structures. That way, users around the world can see what other restoration projects are doing, how they're succeeding, the methods that they're using. And in years to come, we'll be able to monitor and track our success. Are the restoration projects doing what they intended? If they're not, we have to adjust and figure out why. But doing this in sort of a unified standard format available on the platform, this will enable, I think, much faster restoration activities, a better sharing of information and knowledge. And we're very excited to have this module come in some of the next iterations of the tool. Emily mentioned that it's very important that policy and economic opportunity, economic incentives are directed towards mangrove habitat protection and restoration. So currently, nationally determined contributions to the 2017-2016 Paris Accords will not, as they stand now, will not get us to a 2-degree future. We need to enhance, we need to ramp up our level of ambition. Countries need to up their emissions reduction targets. 93 countries around the world, 93 out of 193, roughly, mention nature as a mechanism to help reduce their overall emissions, their overall annual emissions. I'm happy to say that most countries, with the exception of a few countries that have mangrove habitat, are in this category. So we're good there. Mangroves are being considered as a mechanism to help reduce countries' emissions, and that's great. But we need the platform. We need information like this to help them make that a reality. The carbon data, above ground, below ground carbon data that Pete mentioned, that's so cutting edge, best available data that's out there. This is going to directly feed in to the emissions reduction schemes that countries are providing. And now we'll have a mechanism to get the mangrove information, carbon accounting into countries' NDCs and be able to quantify through protection and restoration the amount of emissions they can help that country reduce. Ecosystem services obviously are key to this as well. Mangroves are more than just carbon. In fact, they're much more than just carbon. They provide livelihoods for communities. They provide resilience to changes that are coming with climate change. It's been shown that ecosystem services per hectare are valued at somewhere around $40,000 US per hectare of mangrove. So the need and the benefit of protecting and preserving these mangroves is paramount for the services that they provide. This is our policies. Did you lose me?
No, we hear you, Chris.
Okay. I can you still see my screen? My Zoom is reconnecting. You cannot see my screen. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Well, let's just get into financing real quick, and then we'll quickly wrap up because we are a little bit behind time. So it's critical that countries increase their ambition, as I said before, with their NDCs. And how do we do this? We do this by providing economic incentives to protect and restore mangroves. We do this by looking at voluntary trading schemes for mangroves. We do this by standardizing voluntary markets through groups like Vera. And the Global Mangrove Watch is going to play a key role in this prioritization going forward. So just quickly to sum up, we will bring together the best available science. We'll continue to gather and coordinate researchers, users, practitioners to help make the tool better, to understand what we need, to understand what the audience needs. We want to link people to place and practice. So the advantage of doing this is that you have many users doing many different projects around the world that can learn from each other, learn what works and what doesn't work. We want to engage other partners that are doing similar activity, bring them in both to the GMA platform world and the Global Mangrove Alliance. Groups like the Blue Carbon Initiative, groups that have a broad reach, maybe a reach into the audience that we're currently not as well exposed to. The other benefit of working with the Global Mangrove Alliance is communications. It's a great avenue and network to tell stories and engage audiences through media and communications campaigns. So it's more than just science. It's about getting the word out there, getting science out there, demonstrating how this benefits the work that everyone needs to do, from policy to restoration to research to financing, to protect and preserve mangroves for the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris, so much. So we're about 10 minutes until the end of the session. We will also provide an email address for you to send your questions or your comments if we aren't able to address them right now. We will also share in the chat box some of our websites and ways to follow us and just to continue this conversation. So I would like to start by asking, I think, Pete, there's a few questions on species distribution specifically around mangrove species and how that might be incorporated into future maps. Wondered if that's a possibility to actually even separate between species, and how could you maybe think about doing something like that if possible?
Okay, so from a remote sensing point of view, I think there are areas of the world where you can see some differences in species. Richard Lucas and myself have looked at some areas in Northern Australia, for example, and certainly in some imagery data sets, we particularly looked at some higher resolution data from rapid eye at that point, and you could see differences in species. I think the difficulties is it's not consistent worldwide, so you would have to do localized studies to separate species, and you might find it's possible in some areas, but then in other parts of the world, it might be quite difficult to, or not possible to do that separation. So it might be something that is possible in some areas, but not in others. If that makes sense.
That's great. Does anyone else want to add anything? Lambert, maybe? This question? All right, if not, I will move on, but this one, Lambert, this will be for you. There's a few questions in here about data validation and utilizing some people in the Q&A have indicated that they have finer resolution data at the country level. And is there a way to integrate that data into future iterations of the Global Mangrove Watch, or ways for us to zoom in on that data?
Yeah, thank you, Emily. Yeah, Peter and I were just looking at all the questions and all the spontaneous offers for this data, which is really great. So how we can use this data, so please get in touch if you think you have data that's valuable, is we can use it to build a training data set for the models. Behind the scenes, the Global Mangrove Watch project is divided in, I think, a little over 100 different regions that have regionalized models, and each of those regions, you know, for some we have great training data already, and for others not so great. So the more we have, the better the data eventually will become. You can contact us at contact@Mangrove Alliance for now, mangrovealliance.org, I should say. The website's also listed, or this email address is also listed on the globalmangrovewatch.org website.
Great, thank you. So just looking through here, this might be a bit specific to Pete. What layer parameter is updated in real time? And then it's asking about the algorithm that is used to classify mangroves, and what accuracy assessment do you use when you do classify it as a mangrove?
Okay, so in terms of what's updated in like near real time, that's the change alerts layer that you were shown. And as I said in my presentation, that is not global at the moment. It's been processed for Africa, and what's currently on the portal is for a few Pacific countries. In terms of the accuracy, I did quote accuracies in my presentation. I think the baseline is around 94% in terms of the globally, and the change is about 75% accuracy. And these are done at the moment through well, us looking at higher resolution imagery with randomized points. And I think, just to go back to the previous question, any data that people can provide is really, really helpful, because you guys are the experts of, and know the areas of your mangroves well. Sitting here in mid Wales, we have no mangroves. So we really do rely on kind of interpreting kind of satellite imagery, but also kind of areas of the world that we happen to have visited and know, or areas that others that we know have visited. So yeah, the bigger that pool can be, the better.
Great. And this is just a logistics question, probably for Lammert. It's just asking, what is the way that you can download this data and use it from your own home computer, or can you embed this on a website?
Yeah, for now we're primarily, currently it's not possible yet, I should say. You can download all the data, the Global Annual Mangrove Extent from United Nations Environment Programme's World Conservation Monitoring Center Ocean Data Viewer. This question was asked a number of times, and so the direct link to the data set has been included in the answers. We're working on making the change alerts, so the points, the near real-time change alerts, on making that available via an API, so you can directly connect to it via your own desktop GIS system. For the longer term future, we'd like to have all layers available that way, but it's going to depend a bit on the number of users, the costs, etc. But the direct use case for the change alerts, I think, will add a lot of value to users.
Thank you, Lammert. I'm going to send this one to Peter, and maybe then Chris, if you have follow-up for it, is really thinking about how do we translate this? So you see this Global Mangrove Watch, it's very technical. How do we then use this for uptake for policymakers and politicians who may not understand the science that's on this platform, but need this information? So how do you see us translating that?
Yeah, thanks, Emily. We have a bit of a two-pronged strategy for this. So on one hand, we hope that policymakers, practitioners will find their way to the platform themselves and play with the data layers, look at the widgets and get the answers they need and then integrate it in their daily work. But you're right in saying, of course, that the people who will be doing this are already kind of mangrove allies. They have a keen interest, they make the effort to go to this website. But we want to reach out to a much larger group of people who might not be working with mangroves on a day-to-day basis, but where we think that this information might help to convince them to take mangroves more seriously. So we really want to raise the profile of mangroves with this wider group of people from businesses, people who work with all kinds of government ministries, for example, on sustainable development, coastal zone management, climate change. And the way in which we want to reach those people is that rather than them necessarily going to this website, we want to take the infographics, the beautiful maps, the little tables that are generated by our platform, and kind of make a proactive effort to reach out with that information to them. And because the Mangrove Watch platform provides very visual information, we think with those very nice graphics, we can make a very convincing case. On top of that, what we also want to do is to proactively reach out to that group by telling the stories that come up through the platform. So for example, if we see in a certain country that there is a sudden loss of mangroves or that there is a particular value of mangroves, our thinking is that we want to create all kinds of blog stories, little videos, news articles, and proactively use that visual information to make our case. And that we will be doing partly through the Global Mangrove Alliance, this network of organizations that are working on mangroves already. So they will be using this information as a basis for their communications and policy work. But I do strongly believe that the success of this outreach also depends on a much bigger audience taking a role in doing this outreach. So I would be very keen to invite you to look at the work that you are doing with other stakeholders and how you can take a role in doing this outreach with us. So in a way, this session is also very much an invite to you to partner in this effort, to become a contributor, either of scientific data or as a communicator or a policy informer, and work with us in this effort. And yeah, if you would be keen to explore with us what that would look like, please get in touch with us. And yeah, then we can explore together how Mangrove Watch can serve your current work.
Thanks, Peter. So we're actually at time. We've had over 55, I think we're at 60 questions right now. So I apologize if we didn't get to everyone. So again, Please look at the resources in the chat of ways that you can connect with us. As Peter said, we need your feedback. So please send it our way. We are now going to take a 30-minute break, and then we will regroup for session 2. That will be looking more around remote sensing, and really excited to have you guys join the second session. Thank you so much for participating in this one. Your feedback was very valuable. Have a lovely day. Thank you.